Hey, you have reached Michael Gray at the 365 Success System Online School, and this is the free class, day one or one day, and it's an encouragement, a message of encouragement to parents, educators, and politicians. Of course, anybody can watch this, but I'm really speaking to parents of students and educators and politicians. What do you want for your child? What do you want for your student? I know the answer to that, the best. We want it, but we are not taking care of our children properly. And I believe in the public education system, right? I believe in its possibilities, and we need to get from possibilities to action. And this is an attempt to encourage you to move away from product centered education, meaning how many kids are going to college, what colleges are they going to, how much scholarship money have we earned, so on and so forth, test scores. And I'm not saying those are bad or whatever, but that's our focus. All right. We need to become mental wellness centered schools, mental wellness centered districts, right? Or relationship centered schools and districts. That's what we need to do right now. We can't wait. It's life and death. What is the worth of our children's lives? Here we are. These are mental health statistics from various organizations. 1 out of 5 young people have a mental health condition. 1 out of 8 young people have an anxiety condition. 1 out of 10, and these are conservative because people don't report this stuff. This is what's reported. 1 out of 10 have a mood condition, which is depression. Half of all lifetime mental health conditions begin by age 14. I saw another set of research that had 13. This one is huge. The average delay of any treatment once there is an onset of symptoms is 8 to 10 years. So that means at 13 or 14, I'm starting to feel a certain which way, anxiety or depression, but because my parents don't know anything about it and my school's not doing anything to help me in terms of education, educating me on what this stuff is and how can I move through it. And then there's, of course, the perception that getting mental wellness help is weird and it's not cool. So now I wait 8 to 10 years. I'm in my 20s, and who knows what I've done between 13 and 24 and 23, right? How have I treated the world? How have I treated myself? All because we refuse to switch from product centered to mental wellness centered. 50% of students 14 years old and older with mental health conditions drop out of high school. You want to know how we can get the graduation rates all around the country even higher? Then switch. That's what we need to do. Here's proof that we are a pipeline to prisons. You hear about it, education to prison pipeline? Here we go. 70% of youth in state and local juvenile and justice systems have a mental health condition. That's a fact. It's documented, researched. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in 10 to 24-year-olds. 90% of those who do commit suicide had an underlying mental health condition. What was brought out in 2007? The iPhone, right? And before that, Samsung, I believe, had one. But anyway, suicides have tripled amongst 10 to 14-year-old females since '07, and 15 to 18-year-olds, it's doubled. I do not have my hands on the male research, but I guarantee it's in the same ballpark. The need for mental wellness skills continues to grow. It's always been there, but through societal change, 24/7 internet, 24/7 apps on the phone, all that stuff, that is exacerbating an already existing problem. The achievement gap, the so-called achievement gap, continues to widen. You go into pretty much any district, probably in the 90% of districts where the achievement gap is still far apart. And what's the achievement gap? It's an artificial measure of intelligence. It's saying that kids of color are not as smart as white kids. That's really what it's saying, and it uses standardized test scores and a couple other measurements. All right? So I'm going to show you why kids are disengaged. What's one of the biggest complaints from educators? My students aren't engaged. My students aren't engaged. All right? Here's what Kurt Fisher of Harvard University says. One of the most beneficial things that brain research has done is it's made it very hard for us to split cognition from emotion. The areas of the brain most involved in memory, learning, cognition, and that's the quintessential cognitive function, which is memory, is tied to the emotion areas, right? And all we do is still, from 100, 200 years ago, learn some facts regurgitated on a test. Oh, and we're going to make you feel extra important and make a grip of money for a big corporation, a couple corporations that are called nonprofits. And we're going to make you feel special by learning some facts and regurgitating on the AP, on advanced placement tests, right? SATs, ACTs. We're going to teach you how to study for those, which is more important than gaining knowledge. So the achievement gap continues to widen because we are not emotionally engaging our students. And in addition to that, they are coming to school full of like emotional stuff, trauma, all that. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. Here's a video from Jim Quick, the learning guru, the learning expert. Here we go.
Yes. So going back to this, the M is motivation. So I would always say if you want to learn something new, check in with your motivation, because here's the thing. All learning is state dependent. All learning is state dependent. This is the thing. Information combined with emotion becomes a long-term memory. We know that. Okay. And we know this because ultimately the expert's not always the person on the podcast or on stage. You are your own expert. Mm-hmm. So genius leaves clues. Okay. Genius leaves clues all the time. So when somebody's exceptional in some area, there's a method behind the magic, including for your own self. Okay. So you don't remember all names, but you certainly don't forget all names. Now, we go and deconstruct that, decode that. Usually the names you remember are names you're motivated to. Okay. You're somebody that is attracted to somebody that can be good for their business, yes. Right? So there's the emotion there. So emotion tied to information becomes a long-term memory. Because here's the thing. Is there like a song or fragrance or food that could take you back to when you were a kid?
Absolutely.
Because information tied with that emotion becomes a long-term memory. But here's the thing. Back in school, what was the primary emotion we felt? Boredom, right? Half the room is bored. The other half is confused. But on a scale of 0 to 10, what's boredom? Zero. Information times emotion. If the emotion is 0, what's anything times 0?
0.
And you wonder why you forgot the presidents, the capital, the periodic table, all the things we learned in school, because the emotion level was very weak. Wow. Right? That's why entertainment is so powerful, because education, maybe empowerment is here. Entertainment is way up here because of that emotion. But when you can infuse emotion into the learning process, and part of that is human motivation. Because I remember the second question, I was talking to Bill Gates about he's like, reading is what I'd like to be better at. I'm like, I totally can help you with that, because leaders are readers, clearly. And on top of that, I was like, we were talking about the future education, and I was talking about accelerated learning, and he was talking about tools and technology, and a bunch of crowd was building, and they said, what's missing? You have the tools, you have the theory, and we were like, we came to the same exact conclusion. Motivation. Right? Understanding human motivation. Why can somebody learn something, not apply it? To be able to get that benefit.
So here's the quote again from Kurt Fisher. One of the most beneficial things the brain research has done is made it very hard for us to split cognition from emotion, right? Cognition is tied to the emotion areas of the brain. We have got to stop doing things the way we've been doing. Here's a draft of a paper that I wrote in 1989. The title of my paper was Standardized Testing and Its Track for Failure. So there's a bunch of stuff in there, and you can see where it says towards the bottom middle, most of the attrition in terms of dropouts occurs by the third year of high school. And many educators back then, even in '89, believed increased testing is a contributing factor. And what did we do? Instead of lessening the amount of standardized testing, we increased it. Even though the research said it's why kids don't do well in school, because they become disillusioned, like, I can't do it. And the students that are failing are missing what John Ogbu from Cal Berkeley back then called effort optimism. The faith that hard work will bring real rewards in life. All right? So I come to school feeling like school doesn't matter. Like even if I work hard, it doesn't matter. It's a lie that kids are feeling, right? But we're not doing anything to really interrupt it. In fact, many times we feed it and make it permanent in there and confirm it. So this is what we need to do. This is the first part of this class. There's another video for this first section of the class, and then there'll be a second section. But we need to prick their hearts, students, parents, staff. Everyone needs to be emotionally engaged. Everyone needs to work on their mental wellness skills, on their life skills. All of us do. I do. We need to work on them every day, and yet we refuse to. We're there 8 hours a day as educators. The students are there for 7, and it's built in. The infrastructure is there. They're a captive audience, and yet we won't do stuff that's going to help them, like for real, for the rest of their lives. And whatever, put a % on what they remember for the rest of their lives from school. I'm giving you a second. What do you remember? I remember Miss Haggerty because she was emotionally engaged and she went off topic a bunch of times while still teaching us Algebra 2. Right? And then I remember another thing about, it was called Desperado, and it was about not using drinking and drugs. All right? That's what I remember, those, because they pricked me emotionally. So I bet it's the same for you. So we need to prick their hearts with emotion, build up accurate and positive thinking, effort, optimism, and other mental wellness life skills. Next, we need to acknowledge the systemic difficulties while taking away excuses. What am I saying by this? Racism is real. Poverty is real. Sexism is real. Anti-LGBTQ policies in this country, they're real. Violence is real. Neglect is real. All that stuff is what kids come to us with. And yet we just tell them, oh no, that's not really happening to you out there. This is America. All you need to do is work hard. Well, that's not how it looks. Now, having said that, we do need to take away their excuses for academic and conduct deficiencies. But the only way to do that is to acknowledge that what they're going through is real. The trauma of all that stuff is coming to school to us every day in our classes. All right. We need to then, once we get them to prick their hearts and like, look, we care. Okay, they care about me. Now we build up now they trust us. Now we can build up their academic and conduct prowess, their skills, what they haven't had from pre-K on because they didn't feel like school was really beneficial, right? We just throw kids into tutoring classes like, here, you need this extra tutoring because your grades suck. Well, I already hate school. Now I got an extra thing I got to go to. No one's really helping me. And we need to provide real mental wellness assistance. And then we have to somehow have our staff buy into this effort that is of the highest priority, life and death. Because if we do that, then we'll bring it up to the other priorities. What are the other priorities of teachers? Pacing scales, AP pass rates, D and F ratios, attendance, of course, all that stuff. And I'm not saying that stuff's not important, but that's not the highest of the list. The highest of the list is the mental well-being, the emotional well-being of all of our students. And they're not well-being. How do we know? Because college mental wellness facilities are busting at the seams. They're busting at the seams. SC, USC, I'm not picking on them. USC had a 168% increase over the last 3 or 4 years in the need and use and emergencies for mental wellness services. And this has to be district-wide and unified, elementary, middle, high school. All right? Let's listen to Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown, who is an expert in the research of shame, vulnerability, right? And here we go. This is her speaking to teachers at the South by Southwest conference in 2017. It's a talk called Daring Classrooms. I ask you to Google it or YouTube search it, but I'm going to show you this part, and then I have another part towards the end of this class in the second section of the class that gives you a good flavor of what she's talking about with teachers and what we need to do. I don't even wait for teachers to I just show this to students so that they get an idea of what's up. All right, here we go.
But let's start with vulnerability, and let's start with the willingness to be vulnerable, the willingness to really show up and let people in. How many of you were raised to believe that vulnerability is weakness? Most of us. Here's what I can tell you, and I'll challenge you. Yell up if you can think of something. I cannot find in 200,000 pieces of data a single example of courage that was not completely defined by vulnerability. Let me challenge you. Can you think of one courageous thing that you have seen someone do in your life that did not require vulnerability, that did not require uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure? One thing. I find zero evidence. And let me tell you, I've stood in front of a group like this of special force military people. They can't think of a single example of courage that did not require absolute vulnerability. But we hate vulnerability because it opens us up to being hurt. And we think, I don't want to be vulnerable because vulnerability, where's my slideshow? There it is the center of shame and scarcity and fear and anxiety and grief and disappointment. So I am going to armor up and self-protect. I'm not going to let people hurt me, see me, take advantage of me. The problem is that when we armor up like that, not only is vulnerability certainly the center of these experiences, it's also the center of these: love and belonging and joy. No vulnerability, no love, no belonging, no joy. What do you think is the most vulnerable human affect we experience? What's the hardest emotion for us to handle as humans? Joy. And I'll just share this with you. What was the one variable men and women who had the capacity to lean heavily into joy? What was the one variable they shared in common? This should be a pedagogy of itself. What is the one variable that people who can really lean into joy share in common? It is part of vulnerability, but it's actually a practice. Gratitude. The only variable that really separates men and women who cannot lean into joy, who start dress rehearsing tragedy, and the reason we dress rehearse tragedy is so we can beat vulnerability to the punch. So what we do is like, oh, this great thing's happening. I'm gonna start picturing worst case scenario so that when I get hurt and it happens, I'm all prepared for it, right? But how many of you think we can actually prepare for that? You cannot. 50% of the people in this room have probably experienced the thing that we dress rehearse, and they could come up here one at a time and tell you, you can practice that all you want. That will do nothing to help you when that moment comes. The only thing you're doing is squandering the joy that you need that builds a reservoir for when hard things happen. So as it turns out, our bodies really neurobiologically experience joy as vulnerability and threat, and we quiver. And so some of us use the quiver as a warning sign to start thinking about terrible things, and others use that quiver as a reminder to be grateful, to stop on the sidewalk in that moment and say, I'm really grateful for this date night. I'm grateful for you. I'm grateful for our time together. But that's harder, right? Than to go, have you ever pictured someone? So love, belonging, and joy, absolute vulnerability, but also these things: courage, empathy, trust, innovation, and creativity. No vulnerability, no innovation, no creativity. No vulnerability, no creativity, no innovation. Accountability, adaptability to change, hard conversations. I mean, this is an easy question. How many of you think where you work, your school, your district, your grade level, how many of you think where you work would be better if people had a stronger skill set about having real, honest, respectful, hard conversations? Yes or no? Yeah, everybody. We dodge those and they become toxic in our culture. Feedback, problem solving, and ethical decision making all require vulnerability. How many of you in this room right now have ever tried to make an ethical right decision in the face of a group moving the other direction? You will piss off some people. Yes or no? There's probably nothing more vulnerable than standing up in front of a group of people that you respect, that you work with, that you like, that you feel a sense of belonging with, and saying, this is not the right thing to do. So vulnerability is the birthplace of everything we want more of in our lives. The problem is that we end up here. Instead of having an open heart, we end up with a closed heart. We end up with a protected heart for a lot of different reasons. Some of them are environmental. Let me tell you this for sure. The greatest casualty of trauma is vulnerability. The worst thing we lose in trauma is vulnerability. And let's be very clear about what constitutes trauma. Racism is trauma. Poverty is trauma. Classism, trauma. Homophobia, heterosexism, trauma. And so the biggest casualty of that is, I can't be vulnerable. Well, when vulnerability, the ability to really be who we are, becomes a realm of only the privileged, we have lost our capacity to create a school, a home, and a country that we love.
That is Dr. Brene Brown, and she's my hero. I just want to be like her when I grow up. Here is a demographic of our poverty rates in the state of California, and specifically Los Angeles County, which is where I work, but in any state you can find the same information. 46% of LA County children live at, near, or below the poverty line. All right, the dark areas are up to 68%. It's an amazing phenomenon that we just pretend that kids aren't coming to school not ready to learn. And it's not ready to learn out of spite or that they don't care. They just don't know how to care because they're in a state of survival. When you're in a state of survival, you're nowhere near any kind of vulnerable or creative type of feeling. And I don't trust nobody. So that's the end of this first section. I'm going to leave it there, and then we'll pick up for the rest of the talk on the second section. I appreciate you looking at this. Teachers are amazing. Everyone's amazing in the education system. I just feel like our energy just isn't going to where it really needs to go. And we need to free teachers up from the responsibilities of the pacing chart without losing rigor. I'm not saying don't have a rigorous class. We need to have it, but infuse all these mental wellness skills, and there's so many easy ways to do it every day. Not a day needs to go by. All right, I appreciate you. Thank you.